Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about this. This is the Seagate 2X18 Exos data center drive. Now, why is that exciting? Why have you come to a video about a data center drive? They're the dullest places in the world, right? Well, in its defense, this is a very special kind of drive. We talked about this quite a few years ago. Hell, we talked about it repeatedly up until this point. And this is the first time you've seen one here on the Flesh on the channel, because this is a dual actuator drive. It's a drive that has got two little arms working inside there that allow the drive to be accessed at twice, and in some cases a lot more than that, speed. A couple of little arms reading in there a whole bunch of drives inside. And in today's video, I'm going to do a should you or could you or would you buy for this. I'm going to give you 4 reasons why this is a great little drive to keep your eyes on, and 4 reasons why you might want to sit on the fence and think that is never going to make its way into my server. But before we go any further, if you're watching this video because it was a review, this is not a review yet. Unfortunately, right now, although Seagate have sent this to me on an incredibly short loan, I will highlight I'm not allowed to show you the benchmark results. I'm not allowed to show the review yet, hopefully soon. But this video is about talking about its highlights and its lowlights. So if you've come to this video for benchmarks, you might want to leave now. I know it's really annoying, but I can't show it to you at this time. But I promise we'll have a video in the pipeline for that for you. But reasons for that will become evidently clear later in the video. But for now, let's make our way onto the good reasons to go for this drive. Number 1. Yes, it's chuffing obvious really when you think about it. One of the main reasons people are going to go for this drive is the performance. Look at standard hard drives for not just the last few years, go nuts, call it the last 2 decades. The majority of SATA and even SAS-based drives that have got us upwards of between 600 and 1.2 gigabytes of bandwidth to play with technically, if you want to talk about dual lane. All of those drives, all of which working in SATA, all working in SAS, all of which using mechanical disks and stuff inside, could never really crack the high 2, 3, maybe 350 meg. There were, of course, things like 10 and 15K drives, which allowed performance to really start to saturate more than half of the available SATA that you would get in a 6 gig. But even then, the majority of those were SAS. And in order to have the data distributed in the right fashion for that higher RPM, those drives very rarely exceeded more than 3 to 6 to maybe 900 gig. This is an 18 terabyte drive that has reported performance of between 520 and 554 megabytes per second transfer rate. That is largely saturating a standard 6 gig connection, which again, if you were running an SSD, fair play to it. You know, there are a lot of SATA SSDs out there that can crank out 500 megs, give or take 550 on a very good day. But this manages to do it in optical fashion. It has got 2 sets of drives technically inside, or 2 LUNs, with all the available platters inside being divided between those 2 actuators, and inside it running those 2 9TB LUNs that are kind of in a RAID environment together, which are then interfacing with the system to get that performance benchmark, and all of that in a drive enclosure that is exactly the same as some of their more modern 18 and 20 TB drives. Exactly the same chassis, but they've managed to crank out that performance, which is phenomenal. Now, there is a SATA version available of this, but bear in mind that although there is that SATA version and the SAS version of it, the performance is largely the same. Very small difference between them, but still, you've got to give credit to get that much performance out of a mechanical hard drive is insane. I touched on it there towards the end. This is an 18 TB drive available in both SAS and SATA. There's a 14 TB, a 16 TB, and an 18 TB version. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see a 20 and a 22 very soon. So this is a drive that gives you that enormous performance, but the real takeaway there is the fact that it's arriving in SATA. Now, why is that a big deal? Because generally when it comes to data center high-end ultra class, I just made that word up, but we'll go with it, ultra class drives, is they are predominantly SAS. Now, the reason for that being is due to that bigger bandwidth there and having no limitations on working in RAID groups and multi-lane. But still, the fact that the drive arrives in both SAS and SATA versions is tremendously appealing, I imagine, for a lot of users that are running higher end systems that, either don't have SAS capabilities, the combined SAS SATA connectors on them, or do not have room for MUX board connectors when you wanted to take advantage of these higher end drives in the last few years, including a few years ago, those 10 and 15K ones I mentioned that would have been locked to SAS. Having a SAS and SATA option, as well as the traditional options there for SCD and stuff like that rolled in with the majority of the Exos series, is really, really appealing. And given that both Seagate and WD revealed dual actuator development on their respective sides, both of them in 2019 at OCP and CES respectively, fast forward to now in 2023, they've rolled out now their second gen of this, available in different capacities, and SAS and SATA and WD have only recently unveiled their first formal release into this field, which just shows you just how much Seagate have expanded into this kind of technology at the moment. Next up, this wouldn't be a data center class drive if it didn't tick all the boxes in terms of long-term durability and sustained performance. And it carries the Exos moniker, and going by the data sheets and the reported figures from Seagate, it still maintains that 2.5 million MTBF, which again is data center appropriate, none of the rest of us care that much. But it also has that 550 TB workload. It also has that 600,000 cycle, on-offs. And on top of that, it has still got the same architecture in terms of platter numbers and, importantly, cache as well. They've not had to up that cache to 512. This arrives with 256 meg cache, and it's in that Exos series, but it just also happens to be that dual actuator drive inside, combined across all of those platters and those two LUNs in there. So despite this being architecturally a very different drive compared to the 18 TB Exos series non-dual actuator, not in the Mac 2 equivalents, it still maintains those durability numbers that you would expect from a drive like this, with the added benefit of that heightened performance, effectively double that of a normal drive, and increased IOPS too. Now, for this next point, I want to talk about noise. And I know a lot of you are probably going to be thinking one of two things. One, you're going to be thinking, if this is destined for a data center, who cares a fig about noise when they are noisier than the creation of the earth? And that's a very valid point. But as this technology becomes more available, don't be surprised if you start to see these arriving outside of data center. The second thing is, you would think with two actuators and that many platters, this must be an ungodly noisy drive. And I'm here to tell you, I was surprised at the noise level of this drive. And in order to show you it, I'm going to use this domestic class DS920 that I got rocking around here in the corner. So let's remove that USB there. I'm just going to move the microphone here just a little bit closer. I'm sorry if you heard a bang. So it's about a foot away from this NAS system. So what I'm going to do is install these drives. Now take note of the drives I'm putting inside here. This first drive is the Exos. This is that 2X18. Again, unfortunately, I can't show you performance benchmarks of this drive at the moment, which is super annoying, but better to show you something than nothing, right? So this is the Exos drive. This is going inside bay 3. Pop that in there. And then we're going to go and remove for bay 4. And bay 4, we're going to go for a 20 TB Seagate Ironwolf NT series drive. You're going to hear that drive initializing, but we're not going to format it with DSM or anything like that. And what I'm going to show you is I'm going to run the benchmark tool that comes with the Synology NAS. And I want you to notice the noise difference between these drives. Now, I haven't set up a dB meter, but I will say you're not going to need a dB meter in order to hear this. So first up, let's hear that. So even just installing that non-dual actuator drive, although it's 2 TB bigger, that was noticeably noisier, right? Now remember, both of these are enterprise data center class, both of them are 550 TB workload, both of them are 2.5 mm, both of them are 10 platters, they're inside. It just so happens that one of them has got two little actuators inside. So what I'm going to do is go into the NAS here. We've got these drives available to us. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to benchmark just real quickly for about 15 seconds that drive. I'm not going to show you the benchmark results, but what I'm going to do is run a high access test on that drive. And what I want you to do, I'm going to stay completely quiet for about 15-20 seconds. I want you to take note of the noise level. 3, 2, 1, go. So that was the noise of the high-end 4K IOP benchmark of the Mac 2 drive. Now I'm going to perform exactly the same test, but this time on that IronWolf Pro 20 TB that's only got one actuator, so technically less hardware inside. Run that now. So as you can see, despite that hard drive having the double actuator action inside while it's in during those benchmarks there, because it's been separated into those two LUNs, the activity, unlike a normal drive that would have one actuator that would have to move across far more platters, it's actually reduced the noise level. So once again, although this is not going to be something that most domestic users are ever going to really take advantage of, as this kind of technology expands out of the data center potentially, then these lower noise levels may be something of real interest to people that want to capitalize on this performance and storage available, but lower overall ambient noise when in operation. Now, these are the four things that I really like about this drive and this Mac 2 series as a whole. But it's not going to be for everyone for so many reasons. So now we're going to go over to the 4 reasons why you may never or may never want to have one of these in your data center or large server array. So first things first, this is something that Seagate have published on their own Q&As and is available to see on the data center, but unfortunately in a lot of coverage, my own included, of this drive over the last couple of years, one simple fact about it needs to be understood, and it's something that all dual actuator drives currently in the market, regardless of brand, all face, and that is you need a very specialized kind of server array to install this drive inside. Do you remember I mentioned earlier on that these are dual LUN systems? It's got those two actuators with the storage divided over the available number of platters, and then both working together as visible LUNs that the system can then work with, much like you would see in a traditional RAID. Well, you need specific server support both on the software and the hardware level for it to identify those LUNs. If you try to install a drive like this inside a traditional SATA connection or a system that is not LUN defined or does not have the ability to differentiate those LUNs via that output, you will see the overall storage, but you will only get traditional SATA speeds. You have to have this installed inside a system that is ready to translate and communicate on that dual LUN connection, which can be really disappointing when you, myself included, have looked around seeing all this coverage, and although Seagate themselves have mentioned it, I feel like that's a fact about these drives that needs to be more greatly understood, that just getting one does not guarantee any SATA or SAS connected system that high performance of 5 to 550 megs per second, you need to have a system that can communicate with it and can understand that dual LUN internal architecture on board. There is software out there that you can run on traditional systems in order to do it, but once you factor in the RAID, and you're going to have to factor in quite comprehensive RAID cards to do it, at that point, the performance benefits you might get from that in your own individual setup may not be as worthwhile as the money you'll have to drop in order to communicate with it. So just make sure you're aware that even I reckon for the next few years, dual actuator drives, they're still going to need specialized interfaced equipment and defined software in order to take advantage of that performance, at least for the time being. This is another thing that's missed out from a lot of coverage up to this point, including my own, and that is the availability of dual actuator drives. Now, by that what I mean is not that they're not available, because as I say, Seagate rolled out the 14 and the 16 TB versions of this and this new 18 TB over this one recently, but the other ones before it in the last year and a half. However, finding people that sell them, and e-shops and suppliers, generally most places will only sell them en masse and on bulk. This is a data center drive through and through, and although the pricing on it is obviously based on scale, that also means that buying them individually is tougher than you might think. So even though I'm testing a drive like this on such a modest little 4-bay system, bear in mind that getting drives in small quantities like this is going to be a lot harder to do. This is like a lot of those higher end DC drives that we've talked about in the past, or some of the specialized old Hitachi type drives that would be for, you know, certain climates and stuff like that. The real specialized stuff that it's sold generally by the carton of 20 to 25 drives. Getting these individually is, if not impossible, then really, really difficult. And carrying on that subject of price, it's also worth touching on that for a lot of users out there that are weighing up the performance benefits and the idea of getting 18 terabytes on a single drive like this and getting all of that extra performance, even if they're going to load up a whole data center rack cabinet or just a single fully loaded SAS or SATA array that has the defined connections and interface ability to take advantage of that performance, unless long-term cold storage durability is a question mark for you, there is an argument that going for traditional SATA SSDs can work out more cost effective. Now, if you look at, for example, commercially available 8 TB SATA based SSDs, right now you can get 8 TB drives in traditional 2.5 inch. They will be quad layer cell SSDs, but you can pick those up for about $380 to about $420, $440. Now, this 18 TB drive here, you're looking at $6 to $7 to $750 NICA for this 18 TB drive. It's expensive compared with traditional 1 actuator drives, but bear in mind that same money could get you 2 SATA 8 TB SSDs and still get 16 TB of storage. Now again, you can go the specialist build to order route and get SATA SSDs that are even bigger capacity, and that price does mount up, and you can step away from quad layer cell NAND if you like to increase that durability. But still, there's going to be people out there where if durability isn't the be all end all for you, and your rewrites and your repetitive writes aren't going to be exceptionally high, there is an argument that SATA SSDs might still give you similar performance to this, and the option of the same scale with multiple SSDs than a single one like this. Again, it's not going to be for everyone, and in terms of long-term cold storage, or even warm storage for that matter, where there's going to be repeated write, it's worth highlighting that a drive like this does have an audience, but that audience isn't going to be everyone. And finally, on the subject of technology and how things move forward, we can talk about the fact that as good as dual actuator hard drives sound, and that benefit of that dual actuator and the performance extra it gives you, we've also got to talk about towards the end of 2021 and during 2022, Seagate talking about NVMe hard drives. And if you didn't miss that in Data News of the Week when I covered it last year, these are traditional hard drives that have an NVMe interface. Now, I'm not stupid, I'm well aware that it is still a mechanical hard drive. There ain't no way it's going to be able to saturate a Gen 3 times 4 or Gen 4 type connection over NVMe. That is not the initial purpose of NVMe hard drives. That is, it's bringing two things forward. One, as multi-actuator technology. Again, dual actuators to start. They're talking about quad actuators now. As that effectively double and quadruples the performance possible on mechanical hard drives, SATA suddenly becomes quite a bottleneck, and even 12 gig SAS can potentially become a bottleneck as well, because you're going to need that dual lane architecture. That's why hard drives connected via NVMe could make a lot of sense for that, as they're able to eke even more out of mechanical hard drives. I remember when we were talking about hard drives dying the death. They're still around, and now we're seeing more fabric level server class systems where they're full NVMe or U.2 compliant, but the idea that those same systems could also interface with quad actuator hard drives is fantastic to hear. But why am I talking about this now? Because as exciting as Mach 2 hard drives, Mach 2 dual actuator hard drives are, we can't ignore that on the other side of the room we're seeing faster equipped hard drives arriving in other forms. We're seeing innovations arriving in other areas of the brand's portfolio, not only in terms of overall performance within SATA and SAS, but also seeing that NVMe option opening up, which is already just a prototype. We're probably not going to see that rolling out till 2024, 2025 maybe. But the fact still remains that it may be the reason that might stop you opting for a drive like this, because Seagate appear to be betting against themselves with this NVMe level hard drive stuff, and therefore, rather than going for this now, you could sit on a fence a wee bit longer and see how this pans out when they start knocking out quad actuator and NVMe higher bandwidth and NVMe uniform server class drives for these larger NVMe laned and interfaced servers. But this has been 4 reasons why you might want to keep your eye on the Exos Mach 2 series and grab a few for yourself, and 4 reasons why sitting on the fence may well do you well as well. Now, we will be doing a follow-up video on this, as I mentioned earlier on. I hope to get that out to you as soon as possible, and if there are tests that you want to see on this, let me know in the comments and I'll include whatever I can. That follow-up video probably isn't going to come for a while, so I've got time, so let me know in the comments what you want to see. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to show you benchmarks on this. I'm holding the darn thing, and my server and my collection of rack mounts is just over there. It's as annoying for me as it is for you too. Don't worry about it. Thank you so much for watching. Click like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to learn more. Should be a link in the description to more information and updates on this. And other than that, I will see you next time.